today at the site of the old Rampart station, the notorious spot where LAPD's largest scandal broke out in the late 90s. A station that became notorious for both corruption in the drug area, brutality, and frame-ups. As you see, it's being cleaned up now. This cleanup process has been going on metaphorically since 1998, some 17 years, and the consent decree that was put on the department to deal with the problems was only terminated a few months ago by a judge. We're here today to talk with former Rampart police officer Alex Salazar, and also with Charles Rappleye, the former news editor of the LA Weekly at the time when this scandal was unfolding, who did a lot of the coverage of police issues himself. Charles is now a historian and winner of the Washington Book Prize.
This is Rampart Division. Rampart is named Rampart Division after Rampart Street, which runs just down here and runs through this district. Back when Los Angeles was the murder capital of America, Rampart was the murder capital of Los Angeles. This was a tough, heavy district for crime and for gang activity in a city that was basically held prisoner by gang activity in the 1980s. And the cops here were determined to beat that threat down. And this became the epicenter of the cops' reaction to the gang culture in Los Angeles. And what appears to have happened here is the cops took on that gang culture themselves and became some of the heaviest gang bangers in the city of LA. They were led by a guy named Rafael Perez, and it's Rafael Perez became the lightning rod for this whole thing of corruption and misconduct here at the Rampart station. Perez came to light involved in a bank robbery that he conducted with the aid of a former partner of his named David Mack. David Mack was convicted and sent to prison for the robbery of a Bank of America, and Rafael Perez was an accessory to that crime. And when Rafael Perez got popped for that crime, he raised the question that that was only part of the misconduct that he'd been involved in, and he came through with a long story of widespread corrupt practices coming out of this station here at Rampart. And what happened then was it tore the lid off of practices that have been going on here for years of cops on the street jacking up gangbangers, threatening them, extorting information from them, taking their families and deporting them, sending them to jail on trumped-up charges, sometimes planting drugs, sometimes simply assaulting them. All of this was going on in wholesale fashion out of this division, and as it came out, there was a big uproar, and the cops first reacted by firing a whole bunch of officers, and then the officers started to push back and saying, it wasn't me, it wasn't us, it wasn't as Perez represented it. And the whole investigation and the whole expose bogged down in a series of hearings downtown, in police disciplinary hearings, in trials that never went anywhere. And the question remains, what really happened here at Rampart? Was it just Rafael Perez? To a federal court that the judge issued a decree that put a federal supervisor in charge of the entire LAPD. The consent decree brought some important new practices to the LAPD, including tracking officers' assets and their bank accounts, so that if there was truly large-scale corruption going on, it would be identified by their secret holdings. But more important was a new officer-involved shooting investigation protocol, so that complaints and significant incidents like officer-involved shootings got new independent investigations. They weren't covered up by the. It was no longer possible to simply cover them up by the officers and their partners and the other people in their units covering up for them. They instituted independent scrutiny, a new level of scrutiny, and these sort of practices were exposed in a new way, and that started to break the insular culture of the LAPD in a fashion that really hadn't taken. Of course, reform of the LAPD goes back a long way. There was Chief Darrell Gates, and there was the Rodney King beating, and then the Christopher Commission, and then Rampart happened, and then the Rampart Consent Decree. So this is something that has been going on for 25, even 30 years of trying to get the LAPD to let go of its embattled sort of insular mentality, the us versus them attitude towards people on the street. And the change in the culture of the LAPD has been coming alongside a change in the culture in the city of Los Angeles, where crime is no longer the dominant feature of this city. The bars are coming down, the homicide rates are going down, people feel free to walk the streets day and night, which is something that was really no longer the case in the 1980s. So a lot is changing, but it takes time, and the mystery remains. Here at Rampart, what really happened? How deep did it go? Was it true that the cops were getting in there just like gangbangers, fighting the gangbangers on their own turf for their own drug trade? Or was it something more innocuous, just cops getting tough with gangbangers? Either way, what's clear is that things really got out of hand, particularly here at the Rampart Division, but also in the LAPD in general. The change took a long time in coming. It appears to have taken hold, but again, it takes time, it takes commitment by people outside the department and inside the department, and we're still finding out if that change has taken root and if people can now adopt a different attitude towards the cops and look at them as people, as allies in the fight for a better city, or as part of the problem.
Well, you referred, Charles, to the crackdown on gangbangers. There were also a lot of reports in the media about shootings of people with no criminal record, frame-ups of people with minimal criminal involvement. Was this a situation that, in your view, might have been widespread, and is it a matter, do you think this develops by starting with it's okay to bend the rules for gangbangers, and then that attitude gets adopted more broadly?
I think those widespread sort of effects are part of the program here, partly because when you're dealing with gang members, nobody's got a badge or an ID on them that says registered gang member. So the target audience or the target constituency that they're dealing with there is anybody who's under 21 or 25. All young people are become a target. The other thing that's going on here in the Rampart Division is this is a big immigrant community. So, and one of the tactics used by the Rampart cops was to roll up on a suspect and tell them that they didn't confess or deliver information, that they could be violated as illegals and deported, not just them but their entire family. Brian Hewitt in particular, one of the cops at the Rampart Division, that was a specialty of his, was putting a squeeze on immigrant families. And so you basically had the whole neighborhood here terrified of the cops, and also terrified of the gang activity, the homicides and the extortion that was going on. So you had a whole community, a whole district of the city living in fear and squeezed between outlaw cops and outlaw gangs. That's where it was in the late 1980s, and it was very intense all through Rampart.
1989 when I started, 1990, they were still pre-Rodney King, keep in mind, before the video cameras. And they were beating people to death. I was there, present, when they killed some guy, you know. It was just something that You know, I didn't think that this was what I was signing up for.
How did you? What was your learning process in learning in moving from whatever naive ideas you had going into the academy to learning what the real street practice was expected?
Well, it's like the movie Training Day. You had a really young, idealistic officer, and you know he comes on the job, he wants to do right, and he runs into a monster, and you're there working among these really bad sociopathic cops who think that they can frame people, plant dope, set people up, and do whatever they want. I had a similar experience. I had one of my supervisors, a Detective 3, that was a full-blown heroin addict who got stung by his own people, his crew. No, it wasn't Rampart. It was at Harbor Division. It was this mindset that just changed everybody. Good guys morphing and turning into bad guys. The way that I was taught. And it's very hard if you've been taught that the police are the good guys, that we're the last line of defense. It's an us versus them mentality. Of course, you've heard that numerous times. To change over unless you leave the department or you just have an awakening, which is what I believe happened to Perez. I think that he saw, oh my gosh, what did I turn into? He quoted Nietzsche at the very end of the trial, and he said, he who chases monsters needs to be careful that he doesn't become one. And so that told me, okay, he gets it finally. He admits that he became a monster. And I became a monster. I will admit that too. Because it's the truth.
Well, how widespread was this? I mean, were there people? Were there clean cops and dirty cops?
There is no such thing as clean cops if the so-called good officer is watching his partner beating the heck out of somebody. Okay, all right. That doesn't make you a clean cop because you know what's happening. All right, and the command staff supervision, they knew what was going on. Rampart was known as one of these rock and roll divisions where you come here to kick ass, take names, and I'm not a social worker is what I used to hear. I'm not here to be a social worker. You're not here to be a social worker, Salazar. You're here to kick some ass, choke these dumb motherfuckers out, and teach them a lesson. And that was, as Mr. Rappleye said of Officer Brian Hewitt, who had a habit, a reputation for really administering what they call street justice.
Well, so you left Rampart Station in what year?
1991.
And at the other stations you went to, would you say there was a significant difference in police practices and police
culture? In a Caucasian white enclave area, such as in the Valley, if you're working in a nice community, let's say Bel Air, for example, you're going to have the officer's response being a little bit more different than you would in an area such as 77th or Rampart. And so yes, you would see that very different style of policing versus one down here, which they would call the ghetto gunfighter divisions, where there would be a good chance that you might get someone with a weapon, and it would provide opportunities for what they would call a good use of force, a legitimate shooting, and then also perhaps maybe some bad shootings too.
Alex, I wanted to ask you, a number of the cases that I followed as this whole thing developed, the cops started to say, well, Perez did it all. Perez and his partner did all the real misconduct, and we're just getting splashed with his residue. And I wonder if you can remark on that, or if you can comment on how extensive was this. Was it department-wide? Was it division-wide? Or was it just a couple of bad apples?
Well, I do believe, Charles, that it was systemic and that it was department-wide, because I had a sister who got involved in the Rampart scandal. It became a case classified within the Rampart scandal for a couple of partners who kidnapped a homeless man who took him down by the LA River, shoved a 9mm down his throat, and then pushed him down a hill. Prior to that, to being at Central, she had done her probation over at 77th Division, and her training officer was subsequently arrested on federal charges for planting a weapon. And so that's just my family, all right, a family member that I had that was involved. And so a lot of these guys, they try to deflect the attention from themselves. And back then it seemed to be pretty successful because we didn't have the media that we do today. And when I say the media, I'm talking about the internet. The internet, which now you have videos popping out of the woodwork out of everywhere. And so back then it was really easy to say, no, it was just him, But this station has historically been known for a lot of things, for the old street justice that was done prior to the advent of Rodney King and the era of using cameras to capture the truth of what's going on with law enforcement here today and obviously back then too.
So today, Alex, you're a private investigator specializing in criminal lawsuits against, or civil lawsuits against police abuse. What's your sense from what you hear from clients or attorneys or people you still know in law enforcement about how much things have changed in terms of police practices and culture?
I want to believe that things have changed. However, we're still seeing many incidents where people who shouldn't be killed, mentally ill, for example, are being targeted. We're seeing a lot of deaths involving mentally ill individuals, and so we're still far away, I believe, from getting to where we want to be. We're still also dealing with issues of racial profiling. We still have officers that will look at somebody because they're dressed in a particular way, baggy pants, or they just don't like the way he looks,
right,
and going after that person. And so I would love to be able to say that, we've come a long way, baby, but there's still much more that needs to be done. There's a lot of frustration here. We need to deal with this code of silence and not be afraid about talking about this mafia-like omerta that exists in law enforcement, because there's a lot of fear there, and leadership needs to deal with this now, because people are getting tired of the same old story, the same old shuck and jive game, as they say, and nothing ever getting resolved. The families want accountability. The families want to see these police officers held accountable when you have someone that's plugged in the back, 5, 6, 7 times or whatever. The LAPD has never acknowledged or talked about what exactly happened here in Rampart. It is just a stain, a mark of shame. While we're no longer that department no more. They've tried to disassociate themselves, yet time has caught up with them. All over the country, you have all these situations of demons past, like this place here, coming up out of the woodwork. Officers running for people running for their lives from officers, getting shot in the back, and then you see an officer, Rampart style, having a weapon planted on him. So again, that kind of goes back to the question I was asked earlier, have we gotten any better?
Thanks. Well, we've moved from the closed Rampart station to ask the question of whether that chapter of police history is also closed. We're here at the new light-filled, glassy Rampart station on 6th Street, and also to examine the question of whether there's now more transparency in what's going on in the department. So, Charlie, what's your sense from what you've been following in your contacts about whether things have really changed in police culture significantly since the consent decree was imposed? What's changed at Rampart, or what's changed more broadly in the department, and what hasn't?
Well, as you see, just by this new facility, they've taken on the issue of Rampart in particular and moved to root it out. They've dispersed all the officers, they've shut down the building, they've instituted a whole new chain of command, and they are really, they worked hard to get a handle on Rampart, and there's reason to believe that happened. The LAPD has gone through a big change. There's a lot less of the us versus them stuff going on. The cops are generally very polite. They stick to the book. They don't exceed their authority. They try to defuse situations, and it really makes a difference. And I've personally run into that. That's their reputation. Things have changed at the LAPD, but some things have remained the same. And one sort of nexus of that resistance to change at the LAPD remains the Police Protective League, the association, the union that represents the officers. They fight change on every level. They have instituted proceedings to protect the identities of cops who are accused of misconduct or who turn up and involved in officer-involved shootings. That old mentality of us versus them, it still survives inside the offices of the Police Protective League and institutionally in their resistance to change at the department. The other thing to keep in mind is that LA is a big place, and it's not just the LAPD. We've seen some really egregious activity by the Sheriff's Department, and the same sort of problems of oversight, resistance to oversight, and change at the LA Sheriff's Department. Both of these entities have come a long way and still have a ways to go.
There are certainly people who would challenge your assertion that policing styles have changed.
Excuse me, do you know whether the incidence of police shooting of citizens in Los Angeles has gone down since the Rampart scandal, or are things better?
I don't really have any information about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.